Welcome to another More Than Walking video podcast discussion, where we seek to encourage dialogue on a variety of topics with the unique perspectives of people with spinal cord injuries and other disabilities. It is our goal for these conversations to make us think critically and for us to all leave with a newfound sense of belonging in a world where we have more things in common than we do different. Tonight's topic is breaking the mental health stigma from mass shootings. I'm your host, Fees. Corey, I'm from Connecticut, C4, C5 quadriplegic. And this is a very touchy subject for those who will be viewing and even for those who are part of this discussion. So we take this conversation very seriously, and we want people to understand that these are our opinions, our thoughts about this particular subject and how we can really lessen stereotypes, especially as it surrounds the disability community, as well as trying to figure out some type of meaningful and tangible solutions to a problem that is affecting not only us in the United States, but all across the globe. A new year is always an opportunity to start over, to try something new and not repeat our previous mistakes. This may sound great to us as individuals, but even some things never seem to change, no matter how great our intentions are. As a society, therefore, we should strive even harder to be better as we face more complex issues that are even more difficult to resolve. On February 15th, 2023, a shooting at El Paso Mall became the United States' 67th mass shooting this year. That number is staggering. And while many of us offer up thoughts and prayers, urge politicians to pass common sense gun laws and support efforts to increase mental health resources, there is a dangerous potential for individuals with mental illness or cognitive disabilities to become the scapegoats of this complex issue. So we want to explore this conversation and explore this topic together. And I also want to just add that as of February 15th, as my opening statement said, there was 67 mass shootings. As of March 7th, I believe, there has been over 100 mass shootings. And that definition varies depending on which control group and what database researchers. But a mass shooting is defined, for the sake of this argument, as 4 people who have been either injured or killed as a result of a single person shooting. This does not include the shooter in that one location. So I just wanted to put that information out there, but let's just start off by introducing ourselves. John, you can take that away.
Hey everyone, Jonathan Sigworth, C7 complete quadriplegic since 2006 when I fell off a cliff in northern India when I was 19 years old. And I'm from Connecticut and really happy to be here talking about this important issue.
Awesome. Welcome, John. You can go ahead, Harley.
I'm not on my usual setup, so I can't see everything and everybody. My name is Harley. I'm from Bellingham, Washington. I am a C7 incomplete quadriplegic and have been since my paralyzing diving accident on my 19th birthday in 1994.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us tonight.
And I am Brandon from just outside of Colorado Springs, Colorado. I am a C6, C7 complete from a rollover accident where I was partially ejected and the Jeep rolled on top of me in 2017.
Glad to have you with us. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. So yeah, breaking the mental health stigma on the topic of mass shooting, right? It's almost, you want to use terms like you got to be out of your mind. Only a crazy person would conceive or think about committing such a heinous act. And oftentimes that language seems to be relatively normal when we preface it against something that seems to be irrational, right? And so as I was preparing for this, I was thinking about a lot of that. Like, what really is sanity, right? And what is the act of being insane, right? And so for us in the disability community, we tend to redefine our personal norms. Our norm may be how we do bowel and bladder care or how we travel. That is our new norm. But when you're dealing with a mental health issue or maybe an intellectual learning disability, your norm is just a bit different. So I want to ask you guys, how do you define sanity? And what are your first assumptions about the mental competency of someone who commits a mass shooting?
And then
Well,
maybe, oh, go ahead, Harley.
for me, I mean, even a person doing a mass shooting can be completely sane. I mean, they might know exactly what they're doing at that moment and then go into an adrenaline rushed haze. But it all depends on what the individual is going through in that particular moment of their life. Each shooter is different, as is we are in our own disabilities. I mean, we could have 10 C7 incomplete quadriplegics, and you'll have 10 different scenarios and 10 different levels of independence. You know, to me, insane is where you're un- unable to comprehend what you're doing, unable to comprehend rational thinking and thought of any kind. To me, a definition of insane is look back at the past at insane asylums and look at the degrees of sanity there.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's true. And you know, also thinking about how we use insane in everyday parlance, right? Like something is insane if there's no reasonable cause or something that we could see as agreeable. So in some sense, every mass shooting is an insane event, like, right? Like it's something that is unjustifiable. It's not something that can be rationalized away without some kind of very deprived, morally empty kind of worldview. But also, kind of thinking about this in terms of like mental health. I have a family member who has a mental illness, and he definitely does not act rationally in all circumstances, and can get lost. And so I understand, that element is there, but I've never felt afraid. I've never that's never been a threat to me, but an acknowledgement that, yeah, people can get into a situation where they don't have control or they feel like they don't have control. And that can be a dangerous situation.
It's very true. I think, Harley, what you were saying, essentially, people can be very aware of what they're doing, right? But they can be also driven to a point. And I don't know if it's always driven to a point of insanity or driven to a point where they feel that maybe their voice isn't being heard. And then they do something that is in an irrational manner that then becomes threatening when any otherwise, they might not have been brought to that brink if they had maybe better coping skills.
I agree very much. Like you said, their voice might not be heard. Doing advocacy for people like I have in the years past, I've seen varying degrees. We help. Not only do I do spinal cord injury advocacy, I was a father's rights advocate and still do it on a small scale. But for 5 years, I did it as mainstream as possible. And during that time, I was seeing fathers on the brink of suicide and just losing their minds and doing something stupid because they were being shut down so poorly by the court system and failed by the system in general. And they like you said, their voice wasn't being heard, and all they wanted was to see their child. And it was such an injustice to them. And seeing how they weren't being heard, seeing how they were pushed to a point of, just stepping off a cliff, in so many words, metaphorically, I don't want to say I can understand a shooter. I don't, but I can also see where one can feel like there is no other option.
Definitely. Brandon, how do you define sanity? And what are some of your first thoughts when you see, especially, you're from Colorado, where the Aurora shooter happened to have that mass shooting, what are your thoughts about it?
I'm very torn down the middle on this subject, I guess, because I think in this day and age, our manner of speech has changed so much that insanity, nobody knows what insanity is.
Mm,
Nobody knows what, you know, real mental health means anymore because there's so many broad aspects. The encyclopedia for mental health is like 6,000 pages. You know what I mean? Like there's no cut and dry like 40 years ago, you know what I mean? Insanity was where you couldn't tie your shoe, you couldn't say your name, and you got put in a padded room. It was very clear cut between sane and insanity. Now, I think a lot more of these shooters really are, yes, they are sad, they are broken, they don't have their voice, like we're saying. So they see all the notoriety that we as a society, we as the media give these other shooters, and that's what they want. If we were to completely shut down and give zero media coverage to a mass shooter from here on out, don't cover it. Yes, it's a tragedy. Yes, it needs to be, we need to find a different way of covering it instead of giving these people power. Shut them down. Don't talk about it. Yes, like make sure they're tried to the absolute full extent of the law. Turn them in, rewrite laws to where even if states aren't don't have the death penalty, make it the death penalty for these mass shootings. Set an example on the opposite side of it. Absolutely penalize these people more than we are. Don't give them life in prison. Give them a death penalty without appeals. I mean, absolutely make an example, but the other way. Do not give them any type of power. That's my thought.
I think um, I think you bring up a good point in terms of like the lines when we're trying to define what's happening, right? So on one hand, we need to have clear cut definitions. Part of the reason why mental health gets blamed, part of the reason why we interpret things is because there's like a lot of coverage, right? Everybody is quick to throw in their 2 cents into their perspective on it. And this expert lends their voice to it. And then we have another person. And then there's another pundit that goes about. But then we move away from what's really happening, what's really the contributing factors to it. And it kind of goes into what I was saying earlier about there's no strict definition for what mass shooting even means, right? So if there's not even a definition for that, how then can we turn the table and then start talking about people's mental health? You know what I mean? And then John, you had talked about like, with your brother and I don't know what the extent of as far as his mental health, where it's labeled at it and in terms of how deep does it run or whatever spectrum it may fall in line with. But like you said, you don't feel threatened. And the majority of people with severe mental health disabilities are not the driving force behind mass shootings at all. It's quite the opposite. It's more the people that, they've had a bad day. They've had a series of bad days. I don't want to just, relegate it to something that's just minor and small, but it's a combination of factors that bring us to a point. And then what you said, Brandon, I think it's true also about sometimes it's the power that we give over individuals that cause repeat offenders. You know what I mean? John, what do you have to say about it?
Well, I think, Brandon makes a really good point about the power we give. And well, I don't think it's realistic that, if we have mass shootings that we don't report it. I think there's a lot of power that is given irresponsibly beforehand in terms of social media, the type of groups that currently exist that anyone can access where they are encouraged to take up violence. The lack of moderation of violence promotion on the internet is a huge issue. And people get tied into that, and there's whole social circles that promote hatred and bigotry as one element, but also, like, largely speaking, our society is so addicted to the concept that we have to be happy all the time, that those of us who are struggling, who need a neighbor to talk to, don't have those lifelines, and so can get really isolated, and justify terrible things as way of lashing out. And so there's all those things to it. My brother has something called schizoaffective disorder, so it's functionally like schizophrenia. So it's like, the spinal cord injury of mental illness, as I say. But it's we talk about mental health also. It affects all of us, because whether we can't afford our mortgage, or whether we're stuck in a job that isn't working for us, that's affecting our mental health. It's not just, I think when people call for more mental health resources, they think, okay, walking clinics, they think psychologists, they think insurance coverage. But what we need to be thinking about is all the different things that affect our mental health, like our connection to our neighbors, our access to good education, all those things. So that's what I think of when I think of a mental health issue.
How do you guys personally respond when you first, Harley, I pitch this to you. How do you first respond when you hear the news of a mass killing, when it first happens? Like, you turn on your TV, whatever news outlet comes on, what is your first response to it?
Well, here's the funny thing. I haven't owned a TV in over 10 years.
Smart.
So the only way I hear about anything is through my friends and family on Facebook, or, on a rare occasion, Yahoo, and I'm signing into my mail. They have that webpage that has the news. So I don't hear about a lot of this stuff. And my first reaction, I don't mean this in a cold manner, but my first reaction, because there's so many false narratives going on out in the world, is, okay, did it really happen?
Wow.
Because there's been so many things that have been staged, and I hate questioning everything that I see anymore, but there's been so many lies said on the news, printed in the news, that my first knee-jerk reaction is, did it really happen? And then I start, okay, if it did happen, who do I know in that area that can say, yes, it really did happen, or no, it didn't? Back, goodness, I'd say 20 years, unfortunately, it's been 20 years. My husband here in Washington, he was going about his day-to-day life, and there were some issues in Seattle. Well, the mainstream media was saying that there were riots going on in Seattle and they were burning things. So his sister from South Carolina called him and said, hey, oh my gosh, are you okay? What's going on? He had no clue what was going on, because there really wasn't anything going on. The media was saying there was something big.
Wow.
So that's where I question everything on, okay, how extensively is it really happening? And then if I do find out it did happen, my heart goes out immediately to those families, because it's not just the victims' families, but the family of the individual that felt they had no other choice but to go this path.
That's definitely. Do you think that perspective is fueled a little bit because you don't have access, or you chose not to have access to like television or mainstream media like that?
No, actually, I'm glad I don't have a TV, because there's so many negative things. Even TV shows have a lot of TV shows have a negative aspect. Family Guy, the deterioration of a family. They make the father look like an idiot. Same with the Simpsons. They make the father look like an idiot. To me, they are deteriorating the family core. And so I choose not to have a TV, so I'm not constantly bombarded with negative things or false things. And I can choose to find more positive shows to watch. And so that's why I choose it. I also feel that there's a lot more to life than sitting in front of a TV for hours on end. Seeing children on the buses, age 2, addicted to a phone. And if their parent takes it away, they have a meltdown.
Yeah.
A child at 2 years old should not have a meltdown over just a phone or a tablet. They should be ready to run outside, chasing butterflies, looking at the clouds.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
I agree with it too, as a father of two kids who, they extensively would love nothing more, to be on the tablet and TV. But, I think that's another version of mental health that we're probably going to have to deal with 25 years from now, with kids who grow up in this technological age. But what's your response when you first, hear of what's going on when a mass shooting occurs, John? And do you assume at all like mental health factors of mass killings between the suburbs or the inner city, or a specific race, gender, or religion that's targeted when you do hear of a mass shooting?
Yeah. So the first part of your question, um, my first thought when I hear about a mass shooting is, uh, I hope it's not in my state. Like, I hope it's not near me. Or, when is it going to be near me? Because as you said, we're already past 100.
Right.
And it was a real wake up call, several years ago. I don't know exactly how many years it's been, but Sandy Hook, the massacre in the elementary school, that a lot of people spread misinformation saying that it was staged, where parents were harassed up until this day, saying that their kids did not die. Like, that happened just a town away from me. Like, I could drive there in 15 minutes. That's and so, like, I understand, like, the to the extent that this happens, it seems unbelievable. But what is more horrifying is that, what if it's all real? When is the time where it happens to us and we get to be on camera and we get to say it felt like a horror movie, just like all these other people who are saying it, and it's, so that's kind of my first reaction. And I guess my assumptions that I usually make are probably not mental illness related, but I'm like, but sure, in the broad category of mental health, let's include like bigotry and hatred in that, right? Or rage. I kind of assume that there's some kind of prejudice involved. I was actually quite surprised, in the recent mass shooting, when it was a disgruntled worker, or an Asian man who shot up the Asian dance hall. That was against what my assumptions were. So yeah, that's kind of what my thinking is.
Wait, Brandon, how about yourself?
Um, obviously, like I do feel, my heart goes out to the families involved. My first initial thought, though, is generally not like mental illness. It's what drove him to that point. Like I go back to Columbine years and years ago. Like, I was in high school at the same time here in Colorado, and Dylan Klebold was just a little punk. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of knew the kid because my high school played baseball against their high school, and like we all kind of, like, back then it was, there were inter school parties all the time. So like, I'm not gonna say I knew the guy, but like I had met him,
Right.
and like I kind of saw, like, that dude was, there's nothing wrong with him mental health wise. You know what I mean? He was a teenager that got pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, and when they got tired, they pushed some more. Like, that's my initial thoughts about these, is what pushed them to this point. Like, I really do believe that a lot of these shooters are more than mentally capable to get through their day. They've made it this far in life. You know what I mean? They didn't need to be put in a facility that any dog that gets put in a corner, eventually, someday, it's gonna bite.
Right.
That's just an inevitable part of life. Is human beings can only take so much before they snap and break.
You know what? And it's true. And I think the portion of mental health of recent, and I would say in the last, probably 10, 11 years, especially since Sandy Hook took place. The topic of mental health it follows after the incident, right? And that's what kind of changes the narrative past the point of, all right, let's pivot to what were the steps that led up to why a person jumped off the proverbial ledge, right? So there are some things that took place. And I mean, even to your point, I can still remember when Columbine happened. I wasn't in high school. I was like, in a few grades before high school. And, from my recollection, it was kind of like he was in his basement. They were constructing stuff. Like, to me, I was thinking then, where are the parents involved? There's got to be a community element. Harley, what about you?
I don't know I can't remember where I was when Columbine happened, but going back on mental health, and there's an asylum next. Well, there was an asylum. It's now a Job Corps campus, but the buildings still stand. And I wanted to learn more about the history of the asylum, so I went and looked for books and found an autobiography by one of the patients there, and it was the saddest story because she was going through postpartum depression. And this is in 1923. This is when it happened. And she was seeking help. She asked for help and nobody would help her. Finally, she killed her own child as a last resort, screaming for help. And it got her sent to the asylum. And once she got there, she actually got the mental health she needed. And she got the assistance she needed. And in her book, she said those 3 years at that asylum were the best 3 years of her life.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
that's why I was just mentioning that, because of the health, we talk about mental health and talk about being driven to a proverbial ledge and stuff. And, even back in the 20s, you had someone screaming for help and they felt they had no other option.
I think that comes with the times too, because you mentioned postpartum, right? So
Yeah.
Postpartum, maybe back then, especially in a society where it's male dominated, may not have even understood what that really was all about. They might have just thought that, well, she's a woman, she's nagging, she needs to get over it. When, a woman just recently, I think in Massachusetts, I think she had tried to commit suicide. And I mean, eventually she ended up taking the lives of her 3 kids. And her husband, he reached out to people and said, listen, she's not a monster. But she suffered, I think, from a great deal of postpartum. And for any woman out there who has ever given birth and whatnot, I know for me, watching my wife experience postpartum depression, it's a very real thing. And if you don't understand it, I can see in 1923, she's screaming out for help. And a society that probably can't even fathom what she really means would rather commit her as opposed to getting her the resources. But by then, it's kind of like when we talk about mental health and mass shootings, it always comes a little bit late. One of the things I also wanted to ask is, when we do make some assumptions, not that, you guys are saying that you do or that you don't, but when we make these assumptions, how do they play out in efforts to combat the crimes, right? So I'll give you an example. I asked my wife, I said, when you think of shooting at a Walmart or a grocery store, what do you think first, mental health, or do you think just regular crime, as opposed to a shooting in the inner city? And she said, I think mental health. And I was like, that's interesting, because when the media plays it out and it occurs at a regularly visited area, mall, another retail store, we question mental health. But in the inner city, no one questions mental health all the time. They may say gangs, they may say, family life, which is oftentimes the result of most mass shootings. In fact, 61% of mass shootings happen in private residence. So how do you think our assumptions play out when we're trying to combat some of these crimes? John, you could take that.
Yeah, I think, as all of us are eventually in one way or another, voters or responsible for who we elect and represent us, and therefore who makes laws, etc. Our assumptions, whether we're experts or not, really have a direct impact on the solutions that we can implement as a society. So if I assume that all the inner city crime is just a result of gangs and criminals, then that's going to result in me, just being very anti-crime. Whereas, if people are driven into drugs or driven into gangs because of the absence of after school programs for kids, because the schools aren't funded, or better housing situations and more affordable housing, so people don't need to be in neighborhoods that don't have the things that they need for their family and children, or have to sell drugs to make ends meet, because there's a lack of employment. All of those things are solutions that my assumption make wash over and ignore, just as an example. And for my personal assumptions of when I hear of a mass shooting, I think, oh, it must be bigotry, or it must be hate. They're such a hateful person. I need to direct my thoughts more to, well, maybe it's an employment issue instead. Maybe it's a disgruntled employee or fractions within a community. How do we equip communities, businesses, neighborhoods, to be more welcoming, to be more, I guess, supportive, so that people don't need to cry out for help, right? Because when we think of oh, people need their voices heard, we need to hear them crying out for help. Sometimes, well, I mean, most of the time, it's because they're in a situation, if you imagine if someone's caught in the rapids, right? There's water flowing violently around them, and they're calling out for help. Well, there's two solutions. We either have a very strong, capable person who can always get there in time and throw them a rope, or we could just turn down the speed of the water, make fewer rapids, make our society less cold, more open and connected to each other, so that we don't find ourselves in the midst of the rapids in the first place.
That's a great analogy. Brandon, what's your take?
So I'm not, I don't want to say mental health does not exist in the world, because there are people out there that I know that suffer from very severe mental health issues. But I really am of the opinion that the word mental health has just become a huge scapegoat in this day and age. We all, we were saying earlier, that after a mass shooting happens, everybody always wants to know the why. Rightfully so. There has to be a reason, but it always comes, well, it has to just be mental health. There has to have been something wrong, and I don't believe that in the slightest. Because to me, mental health is very, very severely where people need to be in an institution where they need constant help. That to me is mental health. If somebody's sad and a little bit bipolar, I'm sorry, you can get through your day. You don't need that. Yes, you may feel like you have no help. You've screamed it, like we were talking about, you have screamed it from the top of your lungs. But to me, a lot of these shooters have gotten to that point. But instead of just calling it mental health, we need to look at all of the other factors. If it's a school, how many people were bullying that kid? So do we maybe go after those children of some way? Do we go after the teachers that maybe saw something and didn't do anything? The principal that knew it? Where were the parents? Like you said, with the Columbine kids, you're going to tell me that these kids were building bombs in their garage or their shed or whatever it was for months and months, and you didn't know what your child was doing? Why aren't we going after those parents? You know what I mean? There's so many other factors than to have it just called mental health. It's just a scapegoat to make it easy. Oh, he must have been crazy. No, okay, here's a prime example. Would you consider somebody with an IQ of 129 insane? To me, I would not. Jeffrey Dahmer had an IQ of 129 roughly. He was You know what I mean? He wasn't insane. He was
Right.
one of the smartest people in the room at any given time. His actions may have been classified as insane because it's not normal society to keep heads in baskets and eat people, but that doesn't make him insane by any means. You know what I mean? It's what you do and how you classify it. Of course, obviously, what he did was beyond insane, but
Right.
he himself was not insane. Yes, he probably had what you would classify as a mental illness, but again, that's just a broad scapegoat of an excuse for somebody and their actions.
Right. No, and you're making a very valid point. I think, you know, and Harley, you could tell me if you agree with this or not, but at some point we have to kind of face hard truths. One of the things that and this has nothing to do so much with like tossing like a political football around per se, but statistically, most mass shootings, or how we define mass shootings, happen in states with lax gun legislation, right? And so, I read a research paper that was done by Columbia University, and what they boiled it down to is that, you know, this problem really exists in America. And it's because of our infatuation with guns. It's our infatuation in romanticizing murder, whether it's in video games, it's in, different media platforms and whatnot. And again, I'm not, I'm not advocating against people who are law-abiding citizens that own weapons. I was in the military, so I get it. But I think people have to understand there's a realization that part of the problem is, it's over access to, especially if a person gets to a place where they're feeling like, I can no longer carry on, therefore I want to commit this heinous crime. Is also some of the unbridled access that we lend to people without having responsible ownership to their weapons. I just want to move on to the third question because we're running a little bit low on time. And Harley, you could take this. But the vulnerabilities of people with disabilities in the case of mass shootings have become, sadly, another issue of basic accessibility. For example, how does a teacher with a disability protect the classroom? And where does a student in a wheelchair hide if an active shooter is present on school grounds? What solutions would you suggest to someone listening who may have similar concerns? And how much would increased accessibility of protection make a real difference in these situations? Harley, you could take that.
I can't remember what state it was, but I believe it was just last year. There was a teacher in a wheelchair, and she was actually on the news, and she apologized to her children, saying, "I'm sorry, class, if there was a shooting, I cannot protect you." And her children stepped up and said, "That's okay, teacher. We would protect you."
Wow.
And that just, I'm still getting emotional over it, because it's like, oh my gosh, the children understand.
Yeah.
Me personally, he didn't have a gun, but he went through the mall with an axe and was knocking out windows and swinging an axe at people. And he made it through almost halfway through our mall. And that was just 2 miles down the road from me where I live. And we went down and assessed the damage and saw how far he penetrated into the mall. And unfortunately, as a person with a disability, because of everything going on in the world, when I go out, my first thing is to assess the exits.
Yeah.
I don't go in there to enjoy my time until after I have assessed every possible exit and unthinkable exit that people don't think of on the norm. I assess every threat, every possible thing I can think of to keep myself safe as a person in a wheelchair. Worst case scenario, I'm going to knock my chair over and play dead. That's it, and it's bothersome to think that, we have to think, constantly of awareness and situational awareness, environmental awareness, and to be on guard almost at all times. But for the city that I live in, shootings are becoming a norm. Not mass shootings that I've known of yet, but we have drugs running rampant. We have people driving into buildings, swinging axes at people. We have homeless people walking down the streets with wielding dual machetes. Nobody's doing anything about it. And it's not just about guns. That's the thing. That's the most advertised thing. Crime comes in numerous forms. And so we have to look at, it's not just guns. A criminal is going to be a criminal, or a person's going to, do harm with no matter what. When their mind is in a state of harm and doing harm, they will do harm with whatever they have their hands on.
Very true. How about yourself, Brandon? What do you think could be a solution to, what teachers may encounter, or just in general, especially with us in the disability community?
Especially when it comes to schools, I'm a big Second Amendment advocate. I really am, especially for law-abiding citizens. You know what I mean? Like, a gun-free zone anywhere means there's going to be more violence because, again, criminals don't care. You know what I mean? They're not gonna, oh, I'm not supposed to have a fully automatic weapon. They do not care. I'm a firm believer that we should having an SRO in schools is one thing. Having that officer on grounds is a good first step, but one man, you know what I mean, is not enough. I am a firm believer that we need to arm teachers and have them, maybe not every teacher in the school have a gun, obviously, but have like a special response team of well taught, well equipped teachers that can defend a school, that can thwart an attacker. You know what I mean? When you have 6 guns compared to 1 gun, it is a good thing. You know what I mean? That's my belief. I believe there needs to be more teachers that are allowed to carry in our schools to protect the youth of America. They can't do it. You know what I mean? They are there to learn, and it is the teacher's job to make sure that they can continue to do so. When it comes to the disabled community, again, somebody in like me or John's position, even you, like my hands don't work. I'm not gonna be carrying a gun ever again. You know what I mean? But making sure that there's so many. Obviously, you can't be with somebody 24 hours a day, but making sure that you're as often as possible not alone in a situation where you would have to worry about that. I don't really know a good, honest answer on how to keep people in our situation safe, because it's just there are situations where if something goes down, I've kind of accepted if I'm in a mall and there's a shooting, I'm not running. I'm not gonna try. If you want to shoot me because I'm in a wheelchair, it just is what it is. I mean, I can accept it at this point. I mean, I've seen death already. You know what I mean? I've already died twice. I don't mind it.
No, yeah, we just appreciate the feedback. You know what I mean? Is more about just giving our perspectives on things, but it because it presents a lot of different challenges that folks might not be thinking about. John, what's your take?
Yeah, so I was a substitute English teacher for about, I don't know, I think it was like a semester at an inner city school, and with students who were having trouble reading and writing. These were 7th and 8th graders who were a couple grades below their reading level. So, as the wheelchair user, with kids who were not doing well in school, were very rowdy. I came in contact with a 6th grader who thought he was Al Capone, a gangster with gold chains, like thought he was the coolest thing in town. And, he was the most aggressive kid in the room, probably the youngest one. And I definitely remember, I don't remember exactly where it happened, but there was a mass shooting, or there was a shooting in another school in another city nearby, and it really kind of came home. They're like, wow, I would, I would not be able to protect my students, but we had to go through the drills. We had to figure out where the exits were. And so, yes, I think playing dead in a wheelchair is probably the safest thing someone can do who's in a wheelchair. If you have a power chair, please ram someone or get the heck out of there.
Yeah.
But I don't think the increased accessibility is a real solution, because there has to be something better. Brandon earlier mentioned, mental health is just such a bad term, and I agree. Like, mental health as a cause singles out the individual as the source of the problem. It's not, and really what we should be asking is, how can we improve community health in the wake of these shootings? And community health is a whole different thing. That involves our connection to each other. That involves, as you were saying, Corey, like, how do we protect each other? How do we protect ourselves from ourselves when we're not in safe places? How can we restrict access to dangerous things when we're not going to be safe with them? Like red flag laws for people who are in abusive situations, or the causers of abuse. How can we just, while respecting Second Amendment rights and not penalizing law-abiding citizens and people who find weapons interesting and cool, like, how can we protect ourselves? How can we protect our kids in the midst of those things? And I would never be able to handle a weapon in a school. And if you've ever been a teacher in a classroom, you lose control of that classroom for a second, everything in your bag is gone upside down. Everything in the closet can be turned upside down. I don't know where you would hide a gun in a classroom and keep that out of kids' hands. But it's just, there has to be a number of fixes that we have to look at if we want to improve community health as opposed to just mental health.
And that's well said. And it really, and I'll just, summarize up our conversation. Everybody's feedback was tremendous. And I hope those viewing can take what we say with a grain of salt. We are not, saying that we have all the answers. Sometimes we leave with more questions than solutions. But one thing's for certain, and I listened to a man named Nicholas Irving was asked question about mass shootings. And if you guys don't know, Nicholas Irving is he's known as the Reaper. He's a Army Ranger. He's a sniper with 33 confirmed kills. And he basically talked about what we talked about. And he said, when people are looking at mass shootings, we need to kind of look at politicians. We need to look at the laws that are put in place. You make a law where taxes get higher and a person becomes dysfunctional because now they can't pay their rent because their check is being overtaxed, and another series of events where maybe they have issues with their bank and come into financial disruption and whatnot, which then starts the path to different types of mental health, deep-seated depression, not the type of I just had a bad day, but deep-seated depression where you've been living in a certain mind state for maybe decades. And now that you come to the brink after you've tried to reach out to different community advocates and healthcare networks and psychiatrists and all of that, and seemingly everything, feels like is failing you. We can look at it in two parts. We need better policies in place, stricter gun laws and gun legislations to keep the guns out of people's hands when they are not safe for themselves and safe for others. And then also, to Brandon's point, the person has to take the onus, and we have to look at that person and say, that person did it. It wasn't their mental state. It wasn't anything else. They caused destruction because they wanted to cause destruction. Like the 19-year-old, that shot up the 10 Black people in the Post supermarket in Buffalo. He wanted to start a race war because of what he was watching. All this negativity that's being fed into his mind at such an impressionable age. So there are this is a multifaceted issue. One thing we can leave with is that it isn't always mental health. It definitely is not the elephant in the room that we're all missing that is leading to all of this. It's multi-tier. And the more that we can work together with different community partners and with one another, that's when we'll find some tangible solutions to a problem that honestly will never truly be solved as long as there are people with ill intent. But thank you guys so much for participating in our More Than Walking video podcast discussion. Stay tuned in and join us next month. Sign up for the More Than Walking newsletter at morethanwalking.com to learn about the topic we will be covering next. Until next time, remain encouraged, stay hopeful, and above all else, be aware. Take care, everyone.